This is Chris Spear, and you're listening to Chefs Without Restaurants, the show where I usually speak with culinary entrepreneurs and people working in the food and beverage industry outside of a traditional restaurant setting. I have 32 years of working in kitchens, but not restaurants, and currently operate a personal chef service throwing dinner parties in the Washington, D.C. area. So this is Chefs Without Restaurants, but today I actually have a chef who does have a restaurant. Actually, he has 3 of them. Today I have Chef Michael Gulotta. I first heard of him, in 2018, I went to the Star Chefs Congress in New York City, and I took his workshop. He was making boudin bao buns. I hadn't really heard of him at the time, but I took the workshop, and I loved it. In fact, so much that when my wife and I went down to New Orleans in 2019, we went to his restaurant, Maypop, for dinner, and it was phenomenal. Not a traditional, what you would think of like New Orleans restaurant. Like it's not like po' boys and muffalettas and things of that nature. But again, delicious, and I highly recommend checking out his restaurants if you're down in the area. So he is the chef owner of Mofo Maypop and his newest venture, Tana, where Mofo and Maypop are Southeast Asian restaurants with influences from Cajun and Creole ingredients of the area. Tana's an Italian restaurant that leans heavily on Michael's experience cooking in Italy. And I'll be honest, this interview kind of threw me a little bit. I actually don't remember what I thought I was going to talk to him about, probably his new-ish restaurant. And I have to say, this is one of my favorite conversations, but it kind of went off track from where I thought it was going to go because Michael is so open and honest about things in the restaurant industry. You know, I don't usually focus on the restaurant industry so much per se on this podcast, but the conversation naturally led to places where we were talking about things like staging and employee pay. We talked about things like using commodity goods versus, heirloom ingredients. I mean, a lot of people come on this podcast, no shade to anyone, but, they're running things on the side or, it's just something they're doing for a little extra money and they don't have to run it like a real business. Whereas Michael has 3 businesses, no offense to anyone, but like real businesses that need to make money. So talking about, no, I have to use commodity pork shoulder for this pork dish. Whereas a lot of other guests have come on the show and say, they're only using the best, most premium things and farm to table, yada, yada. And, we also talk about the fact that he's had some struggles with his restaurants financially and has had to stop doing lunch at one of them. And is it even the right decision to stay open? Again, where a lot of people want to flex and, everything's fine and everything's great. He was really brutally honest about a lot of these things. And that's what I really loved about this episode. He's very candid about, what goes on in his restaurants, what's worked, what he's had trouble with. So while this is a love letter to his restaurants, I do think it's also a reality check in many respects. So forgive me for being more off the cuff here. I had scripted out kind of what I wanted to say, but so much of it's going to be in the show notes if you really want to check it out. He was a Food and Wine Best New Chef. He was one of Plate Magazine's top 30 chefs to watch. He's received multiple James Beard Award nominations. So a really decorated chef with a great reputation who's making great food. So I hope you enjoy listening to this episode as much as I enjoyed talking to him. Again, I just kind of threw out my questions and let the conversation go in the places that I thought were both important and interesting. And I kind of think that's what makes a good podcast, right? It's not overly scripted. This wasn't a PR, pitch about his new restaurant. It's really him talking about what has worked for him, what hasn't worked for him, and what's next. And as I say all the time, if you're loving the show, please share it with people. Just let them know it's out there. And if you're so inclined, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts, if they allow a rating and review. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to this, and have a great week. Hey, Michael, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you on. We were just talking a little bit. I have tried your food. I've been down in New Orleans. New Orleans, one of my favorite places. Actually, I thought I was going to work there. I went to Johnson & Wales for culinary and graduated in 98. And back then I was really interested in kind of like Cajun Creole. You know, I come from Massachusetts, the land of Emerald, and was maybe going to follow in his footsteps a little bit, and went down there and checked it out, but it just, it wasn't in the cards. So now it's a place I just like to visit.
No, that's awesome. I mean, you and I were in culinary school at the same time. So, but I went to Nicholls State in Thibodaux, Louisiana. I almost went to Johnson & Wales, and then Thibodaux had a full scholarship. So that was way better for me.
That is such a great deal. And I kind of wish I had a place that had a full scholarship for me and wouldn't have even necessarily, you know, in hindsight, I don't think it's that important to go to one of those higher end culinary schools. It's something we talk about on this show all the time.
Right. And that was the thing is that, you know, I looked at Johnson & Wales and all, and I looked at CIA, and I was like, dude, there's just no way. I'd have to pay. I would have to take out massive student loans, and it just so happened that at that time, the state of Louisiana had this loan program to keep students in Louisiana. And it was like, and the state paid my way entirely. I was like, that allowed me to do so much more because I left without debt. Yeah, I was immediately able to go to Europe and live for free above a tool shed in Italy for 8 months. And that just allowed me to do so much more than if I would have left with, you know, $50,000 in debt. And I remember being the chef de cuisine of Restaurant August, and these kids would come in, they're like, well, I need to make a certain amount because I'm paying all this debt back. I'm like, you're a line cook, man. I can't the numbers don't work. I can't pay you. This would have been 2006. You know, I'm like, I can't pay you $20 an hour in 2006.
Now, you talked about going to Europe. Is that something you would recommend in this day and age that people could do, especially not getting paid to work? Because there's a lot of talk about that, like the whole staging. And are we at the tail end of this staging for free? Is that something that's still a viable option, or should be done, or should everyone be getting paid?
I don't know about now, because now, like, America really is sort of leaning into its regional cuisines. The only thing that's great about going to Europe is everywhere is getting more into seasonality. And in Italy and in Europe, they still cook with that seasonality. Although now I feel like people are swinging back away from seasonality just because it's so hard to manage. You know, I think post-pandemic, people are leaning back into convenience just because of labor shortages and because everything's so damn expensive. You know, and even the farmers realize that trying to do, you know, there's still only a few farmers left who are really trying to do total seasonal locality, like wanting to go through all those steps because it's a lot of work. You know, a lot of younger farmers 6 years ago were trying to switch their farms over and cook just for, you know, the CSAs and the local restaurants. And I talked to some of those guys now, and they're like, "No, man, it was easy just to go back to like big farming and just." I mean, that was hard work. It's a lot of extra attention to detail, and people just got worn out, I think.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of farmers. I've had some on this show. I'm someone who's always looking for like heirloom products and cool things, and they've said to me like, it doesn't make sense to grow. Like, I can't sell half of it unless I'm growing it spec for like a chef. Like, nobody wants that. Like, I can't even get rid of my kohlrabi and my CSA. Like, I don't know about growing fish peppers because you like them. I'm just going to do some jalapenos, and that's my one hot pepper, and that's it, you know? And
yeah, it is. I mean, and I think there's just I'm trying to think what's a collective just exhaustion from the pandemic and trying to navigate it. And like, I think all of that will come back as people naturally want to practice their art, and they're going to work a little harder to do it. So I think that pendulum will swing back, but I think there's just this collective exhaustion where people are like, I don't want to do that right now. I want to survive. And then once I get my feet back under me, then I'll start doing the things that make me happy. But right now, we're just going to try to get through this.
Well, and I've heard you talk on another podcast about having to use some commodity products at your restaurant because of the price point, that like you couldn't have a restaurant that was only using, you know, heritage breed animals and super niche vegetables, that at like some point, if you want a profitable restaurant, and I think that's the balance of like, it is a business, right? Like, people say this is what they want to eat, but also they're complaining about costs at the same time. So how do you balance that?
And I oftentimes think I shoot myself in the foot because I am brutally honest about everything. And, you know, you notice like a lot of chefs get higher acclaim because they just sell these pie in the sky ideal. But no, we only use local. I'm like, that's physically impossible. You physically cannot do that. I mean, there's just no way. You've got to bring in commodity onions because, yeah, my Mofo's price point is $25 a head, guest check average. And we still bring in some local items for like specials and like right now it is Creole and heirloom tomato season. So yeah, we bring it in and we do a few specialty items. But I mean, for my Burmese pork, I have to use commodity pork shoulder. There's just no way. And I mean, I remember when we first opened Mofo, because, I came from a super high-end French restaurant where, and even then I was honest, even when I was running that restaurant and getting interviewed, I'd be like, I was really proud because we got to like 60 or 70% local, and that was hard to do. And so, of course, also then you were like flying things in from everywhere around the world. That's back when you were still flying in fish from, Australia and flying in asparagus from Spain and, you're a white asparagus from Spain or Germany. Like those days are over as well. But I was proud to just get that much local. I remember I was, touching tables at Mofo when it first opened, and some ladies like, are these chicken wings all local? And I'm like, do you want to pay $40 for a bowl of chicken wings? I mean, because there's no local farm that could keep up with the amount of chicken wings we go through. And if they did, that's how much it would cost you. And like, if people just don't want to hear that.
Yeah, no, not at all.
Yeah.
I have a friend locally, and we're just talking. He, is buying stuff from a CSA, and he said that their mint was $25 a pound. It's like, if it's a product that's going to make a difference, but I don't know, is your special, organically raised mint that's $25 a pound any better than,
right,
generic mint that you can buy for 69 cents a bunch at H Mart? Like, I don't know.
And it might I had one lady who used to grow for me, and I'd miss her dearly because we used to have she used to, she'd harvest all the cilantro blossoms for me and she'd harvest all the parts I really wanted. I had her growing some herbs for me, and they were so powerful, people didn't want to eat them. Like, she was doing such a good job at growing them. Like, the mint was aggressively mint, to the point where it was almost bitter. And so, no, sometimes people don't want that. They want their very toned down, approachable. They don't really want to see how strong something can be. We are kind of that 20% as far as wanting to really see how far you can push it. Most people just want to get right down the middle and be nice and comfortable. Maybe they get to try a few new things.
And there's a place for that. I think the whole spectrum, you're going to find your customers. But again, as a business, what makes sense? So let's kind of start with the restaurants. You've got a new restaurant, but I want to kind of go back to the beginning-ish of, you have Mofo and Maypop. Those are Southeast Asian restaurants. How would you describe the food at those two restaurants in your words?
Once again, I think I give my business partners fits because I make everything way too complicated. Well, the original idea for Mofo was that, in New Orleans, per capita, we used to at least have the largest Vietnamese population per capita. And it's, oddly enough, the more you sort of do your research, that was due to the Catholic Church because Vietnam was a French colony, so they had a huge Catholic population. So they would go and bring them all over. So there's these huge Catholic Vietnamese communities all on the Gulf Coast, and it was just like Vietnam. It's all brackish water. So they all immediately became shrimpers and farmers because it's the exact same kind of growing season, the exact same, fishing styles that you use, shrimping and crabbing and all that kind of stuff. And so they all settled here. So I grew up with a ton of Vietnamese influence. And, everyone who was working in fine dining New Orleans restaurants, which is this sort of Cajun Creole, French, very rich, we'd all find ourselves going and eating Vietnamese on our days off because there's this huge Vietnamese population. And so, at that time, I think all of us fine dining people were running to like something more casual because we were all in that pressure cooker, like tasting menus. And we were like, so we went to basically the neighborhood that I lived in, my business partner and I, and we found this spot and we're like, we're going to do something totally casual, like for cooks, servers, and bartenders. And that was Mofo. And originally Mofo was going to be just this sort of small thing that we were going to run very cleanly and real slim, and then use that to open like a higher end restaurant later. We did not know what we were doing. So obviously, because that doesn't work that way, but suddenly like Mofo was on these top lists, like top eater lists. And so I was like, oh shit, I got to make this way more interesting. And so
you're hoping to just kind of fly under the radar a little bit for a while.
We were literally we were literally, how hard is it to serve soup and noodles and make money? And that's what we were thinking. And like run it with no staff, that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, like we were on, like Eater National's most anticipated restaurant openings. And I'm like, oh shit,
Changes everything.
So then it was like, okay, like, so then I redid the whole menu, made it way more, I think we did like sticky rice steaks with uni and stuff when we first opened. And, it was a really intense menu. That was the coolest thing is I had cooks coming in and working for me and being like, dude, like, this is like a new cuisine, like what y'all are doing. And it's like, and that was what was so hard about both restaurants, man. Like friends in the industry and I've always sort of shrugged these things off, and I've learned to listen now because they would come to me and they're like, I don't know how to describe this to my friends to ask them to come eat. And I'd be like annoyed. I'm like, why? Like, why can't you get this? It's like me coming.
It's just good food, right? It's
right. And it's like, just come eat. But people need to feel comfortable. And if they don't feel comfortable, they're not going to come in. And this was a huge problem, especially for Maypop. Like Mofo, it was just like, hey, Vietnamese food, New Orleans. It was a little easier because people kind of understood, but even there, it was a little tricky. And Maypop was super hard. But it's funny because if I'd go do a cooking demo for someone, like people would invite me to do these cooking demos. And so I cooked for like 30 people and I'd show them. I'm like, okay, this is what Maypop is. Like, I'm taking the flavors of a New Orleans shrimp Creole, but I'm subbing in coconut milk and lemongrass and fish sauce and shellfish paste. And so then it's somewhere between a Creole and a curry. So it's like, is it a shrimp curry? Is it a shrimp Creole? And then I'm taking my training in Italy and I'm making fresh pasta and I'm tossing it all together and I'm serving it to you. Try it. And then they'd be like, holy fuck, this is delicious. I'm like, yes, see? And so I could convince these little groups of 30 people. And it's literally what I had to do for like the first 5 years of Maypop. And then by like 2019, that restaurant was a monster. And just like people just started really understanding what it was all about. And so that's what it is. It's just like finding these natural pathways. What I always like to say is Mofo and Maypop are like, what does a third generation Vietnamese New Orleanian serve their spouse who's from Lafayette?
Okay, that's an interesting description. Yeah.
What do they cook for them? Because I would go to my Vietnamese friends' houses and I'd see I would see their aunts like cooking Vietnamese, but they would sub in New Orleans ingredients. So they'd sub in crawfish, or they'd sub in, they sub in these flavors, and I'd be like, holy shit, this is amazing. Like they're taking these things that we have here, but they're using the flavors of Vietnam, and it was just so damn good, and it was just this natural thing. And so I tried to just sort of hyper evolve it, where I'm not just like taking, I think the fusions of the 80s and 90s was sort of large Hadron Collider smashing cultures together and seeing what happens. Whereas I was trying to find natural pathways to do it.
Yeah, and fusion is such a dirty word. And I noticed you steered away from that early on when you were describing that, because I do think there's so much of this. We've got a Japanese pizza, and it's like we put Japanese ingredients on a pizza, and you're like, I don't know if this works. But I recently spoke to someone for the podcast, and she studied Chinese cooking, and we kind of veered into like Chinese American. And she said, and very similarly, like it became its own thing, right? Like these people came here from China, but they didn't have the ingredients, so they had to kind of create their own cuisine. So we've done Southeast Asian, but you have a new restaurant, which is Italian. So I'd actually love to hear about what that's like. I know, so this started as a pop-up almost a decade ago. Is that right? Like this is something you've been toying with for a little while?
Yeah, I mean, so for the longest time, pasta was my obsession. So, I trained in Liguria in northern Italy, and that's what I always wanted to do. I always wanted to do pasta, and it's weird how things work out. I ended up doing Mofo, and so that kind of sort of took a right turn. But then Maypop was sort of my foray back into pasta, because Maypop had a huge house-made pasta section of the menu. But yes, in between, how strange things work out, we were doing bar food at a friend of ours' bar, which is very busy in New Orleans, and they had a second bar. It was like a really nice cocktail lounge that was also an art museum. It was a really cool space. And they're like, can you do something for here as well? And I'm like, yeah, man, I want to do my little Italian pop-up that focuses on Ligurian cuisine, because a lot of people don't know Ligurian cuisine, especially not New Orleans. And so that's Tana. And so did that for a few years. And it's funny how many people, because it was like, man, it was on Tulane Avenue. It's kind of a rough spot. There wasn't, it never seemed busy. But the amount of people that came to me and was like, man, Tana is awesome. And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. And so fast forward, it's pandemic time, and there was a friend of ours who we talked to a few times, and he was trying to get us a space for an actual Tana. And I was like, man, I don't want to do Tana unless I can really do it right. And he was like, hey, I got some guys want to open a restaurant on this really nice area of a suburb of New Orleans called Old Metairie. And they want to talk to you. And so we sat with them, and originally it was like, we pitched them the idea, and they were like, oh man, we love it. But it was kind of like we were just going to sort of manage it. And they're like, well, this has now become so much your project. Like, let's make y'all partners. And so that sort of birthed Tana. And it has really become my job, like an over the top restaurant. It's one of those ones where I never, most of our Napop, we definitely bootstrapped just with a little fun, almost like crowdfunded money, and then ran and got loans and opened these restaurants. And this is one of those ones where I actually have like partners and backers. And it is this massive 5,000 square foot restaurant with a really awesome cocktail lounge. And it also has like a giant wine cellar that's all glass enclosed. It has a pasta rolling station in the dining room. It has, the nicest pasta making equipment I've ever had in my life. A beautiful main dining room with all walnut tables that are all like handmade walnut tables. And then, it's for the first time ever, I have a rationale oven, which has changed my life. The things you can do with them is just unreal. And then, really being able to, for the first time, really being able to design my own kitchen. It's a monster restaurant. And I think the hard part is, now we're like 6 months in, and it's figuring out, okay, we got so caught up in being a monster restaurant. Now we have to get back to sort of streamlining and training the staff up, and, and really great, especially front of house, like really great front of house doesn't really show up for the first round. The seasoned veterans, they hang back for like 6 months and let you work out the kinks.
Make sure it's going to open and be a place that they're going to want to be at.
Yeah, they know better than to try to be on an opening team. And so now we're at that like 5-6 month mark. And so now all these veteran servers are starting to jump on board, and a few from the get-go are still with us, and they're awesome. But like, God, the first 3 months are always hell, because you're dealing with a lot of servers that don't know the finer points, and you're trying to train them up quickly. And there's a lot of that. And, thankfully we got a lot of good cooks right off the bat. We have almost our entire opening team with us, and they all do a great job. And we picked up a few more really solid people along the way. But now it's starting to really feel good. Like, you walk to the dining room and you're like, okay, the tables are all very well manicured. We have this roving pasta cart that took us about 3 months to get off the ground. So, we have these 2 cooks that are trained up, and they're really awesome showmen. And they roll this cart from table to table, and they do tableside pasta out of a giant wheel of grana padano. And so that's going to become a whole thing.
I've never seen that before.
So it's very popular in Italy. They call it pasta alla ruota, which is really more the American name for it. The Italian name is like, oh God, I can't remember it right now. It's a very long, it's like pasta tossed in the block of cheese. Like, it's all spelled out in Italian. It's a very long Italian phrase. And at the end, I just have, in parentheses, that cheese wheel pasta. So everyone orders it. But it's a lot of fun, and you can get whatever you want. So it's always just house-made tagliatelle. And then we scrape out this giant wheel of grana padano. I use grana padano because I spent half my time in Liguria, but I spent some time up in, or most of my time in Liguria, but I spent a few months up in Asti and in the Po River Valley, and that's where grana padano comes from. And so I got to go to some grana padano factories, and I just feel like it's like the more powerful Parmesan. So we get whole wheels of grana padano shipped in. I think we go through a wheel in about 6 weeks.
That's a lot.
And so we've got these my 2 guys, Isaac and Gavin, trained where they know how to crack into the wheel, and then they slowly work it. They scrape it out slowly down all the way to the edges, and so it slowly gets entirely used all the way. When you're done, all you have left with is just a giant hollowed out rind of grana padano. So they scrape the cheese up, and then we had this custom made all walnut wood cart made. It's really impressive. It also weighs about 300 pounds with the wheel of grana padano on it, because the wheel of grana padano weighs almost 100 pounds. So pushing that thing around the dining room is not easy. But then built into it is also a burner, so they can actually, because every time I've had the pasta alla ruota, it always gets to the table cold. Because they usually just bring hot pasta from the kitchen with a little hot pasta water, and they work it in the giant wheel of grana padano. By the time you get it, it's kind of cold. So I made sure we built a burner into it. And we do a bit more of a show where we flame it with marsala, although marsala doesn't have a high enough alcohol content to flame, so we actually hit it with a little 151. So it's like this balancing act of like pasta with fresh pasta water, and then a little marsala. The 151, we flame it tableside. When then we pour the flaming pasta into the giant wheel of grana padano. We stir it around. It gets so aggressively cheesy that we actually tell tables, like, you don't want this as your entree. Like, if this is something that you put on the middle of the table and you all scoop out of it, that's kind of your sides for your entree. Because it's like the most intense mac and cheese you've ever had. Yeah, and it's a really fun display. And then, but people add things to it. You know, we do fresh shaved truffles, or you can add crab meat, you can add shrimp. On a busy night, we'll sell like 40 or 50 cheese wheels. And so that, you know, those guys get their workout. By the end of the night, they are exhausted.
And it feels like such a nod to New Orleans. Like I can't think of having tableside preparation anywhere but New Orleans, you know, from their rich history of desserts, you know, whether you're having a bananas foster or something like that. It's not something you really see much anymore, but I do feel like that's a very New Orleans kind of thing.
And I think that's why we had to add the flaming, because usually if they don't let a lot of that, I mean, some places do the flaming in Italy. It does happen, but that's why we felt like we had to build the gueridon, because that's a very New Orleans thing of having the gueridon rolling through the dining room with the burner on it. And so we felt like we really had to add that to it.
So now you've been open for a while. How do you manage having 3 restaurants? You also have are you still out at the airport? Do you have a location out at the airport as well?
Oh man, the airport location. So the airport location is not really me.
Okay.
That was it was a huge deal. So it was really awesome that we were sort of thrown in the hat for that. I mean, most of it had only been open for maybe a year when that happened. Just absolute insanity. They came to us like, hey, we're building this new airport. We want to put Mofo in it. And we're like, what? Well, it's not really how it worked. They put out bids. And you have to pick a team. And so like 3 different teams were putting in bids, and you just had to pick a team and hope you got it. And I had other they really wanted a bunch of local restaurants in the airport, local restaurants and bars in the airport. And so I remember some friend restaurateurs of mine picked a different team, and like we were all like, oh, we're gonna get in, and Mofo got in, and like some of my other friends didn't, and I was like, oh my god, this is gonna be amazing. And I'll give the company that runs it credit. When we first tried to get it open, they really tried hard to make it like the original Mofo. They really put the work in. And like for 3 months, that thing jammed. Like, oh my God, like 400 covers a day out of this little restaurant in the airport. And then pandemic hit, and it just fell off the map. I tried going in there, and like once a month I was going in there and training an entirely new crew. And I'm like, dude, this is not going to work, and so it's there and it does its thing. And, one of the biggest things for Mofo that's helped Mofo is John Folse. I went to his culinary school. So the John Folse Culinary School is at Nickel State in Thibodaux, Louisiana. And I worked for him when I was at that culinary school, like at his restaurant in Donaldsonville. And so I came to know him. And then when I left, I was very lucky. I was a Food and Wine Best New Chef. I was a Plate Magazine Chefs to Watch. We were in the top 50 for Bonap with Mofo. And so at that time, I was sort of the most decorated person to come out of his culinary school. And then there's a Folse market in the airport as well. And so he and I, and for the same company that runs them both. And so he and I were in a lot of the same planning meetings for putting all of our restaurants in the airport. And I was talking with him about like the stress of trying to make like Nook Mom caramel for the airport and trying to make like Vindaloo curry for the airport. And he's like, I would do it in his voice, but it's very funny. He has a really thick Cajun accent. He's like, Michael, come up to the facility, because he makes all this food. Like John Folsom Company makes like, if you have packaged gumbo anywhere in America, like he makes it. He also makes all the sauces for Shake Shack.
I had no idea.
Yeah, he has this massive production facility in Donaldsonville, Louisiana, that makes sauces for TGI Fridays, makes sauces for Chili's, and the reason his is so good is because he puts so much attention to detail. Like the sauces are really, really well made. He has there's a whole giant scientific test kitchen, and all the people are typically ex-Nichols grads who then went on to get degrees in food science. And so he's like, hey, we will make all of your hardest to make sauces here, which was just a huge game changer for us. And that's why now my business partner and I are really working hard in trying to make more Mofos, like mass produce Mofos. So the one in the airport, yeah, it was very cool because one, the airport team made it look really good, and it forced us to come up with our recipes for full. So now he can make them in mass because he makes them for the airport. And so now, like, we kind of have all of our stuff prepackaged. So if we want to start making more mofos, we can. We just have to kind of find a really good first satellite location, how to build it. That's actually something he and I are working on right now, is trying to brainstorm the first true satellite of mofo. But it's going to be very, very different. It's going to have to be much more pared down. It can't be the mom and pop style restaurant it is now. But to get back to your original question, how do you manage 3 restaurants at once? There are days where it's a huge learning curve and you're like, good God, could I just close one of them or maybe even 2 of them? But it's an entirely different management style. You have to give up to your staff and you have to trust that your staff is going to do the right thing. But the thing I'm learning now is I have to make time for all of them. I've got to be able to swing through each location because, like, I've just been at Tana for the last 5 months, right? Like, that's all I've been doing. And everyone kind of understood that. But now I'm trying to get back through and swing through each restaurant and taste. And, I'm very lucky in that everyone who's in a management position at my restaurants really cares about the restaurants. We've been really, really lucky in finding, like, our general manager at Mofo has been there since we opened. She started as a hostess. Then she went over and was the AGM at Maypop, and then she came back as the GM at Mofo. She cares. And like my chef, Dickazine at Mofo, Paul Schell, has known me for 7 years. And the man just, he and his wife go and live in, before pre-pandemic, they would go and live in Indonesia for a month and a half every year. That was like part of our deal is like, okay, I pay you a certain amount knowing that you're going to leave for a month and a half every year to go live in Indonesia. And he would go and because his wife had worked down there. And so they would go and live for a month and a half and he'd tour around and eat and all. But he'd come back with so much inspiration. It was a huge boon for Mofo because he'd come back. And then one of the years I went with him and we spent 2 weeks touring Southeast Asia. And we just came back with so much fresh inspiration. And it totally changed Mofo and Maypop's menu again. So like having him in that position. And then, I just have a new chef de cuisine at Maypop who's really changing it up. And we launched Maypop's downtown, and that's been a whole shit show because downtown New Orleans has gone into the gutter because no one goes to work downtown anymore. So like pre-pandemic, Maypop would do anywhere between 70 and 100 people for lunch every day. Now there's no lunch.
So that's just remote workers. Like so much of these jobs are remote now.
Exactly. So, I talked to and that was the crazy thing is when I opened Tana, because I'm always, like I said, I'm always brutally honest. Like my business partner and I were getting ready to shut Mofo. Maypop. We're like, all right, man, it's just like downtown's dead, at least for us, because we went and do an up and coming part of the downtown. There's still like this sort of busier centers that are still pretty busy, like Chapatula Street and some parts of the French Quarter and like near the convention center. They're still busy. We went into what we knew was an up and coming area. And by 2019, we were a very busy restaurant. We were doing, like I said, between 70 and 100 covers a day for lunch and anywhere between 150 and 210 covers for dinner. We were just jamming. And it's a tiny restaurant. Maypop's barely 2,500 square feet. So like literally at the end of the shift, you would have nothing left in the walk-in. You'd just be out and you have to prep it all up again the next day while you were putting out.
That's a good way to be, right? If you have a restaurant to sell out all the time.
Right. Yeah. So, it was stressful for my staff because we get to the end of the night and we're like, we're out of food for tomorrow. And you're like, shit. And then you knew you had 70 on the books for lunch. So it was just a monster. It had become quite a monster. But then post-pandemic, literally, dude, I'll be honest, my Maypop does, like right now in the summer, we're doing like 20 covers a night.
So is tourism fallen off in general there? Because I always think of it as a place that people love to visit and they're just not back.
It's the kind of tourism. So, you had pre-pandemic, you still had people that had to come down to work every day, even in the summer. So you still had lunch business. And then you'd have the sporadic different kinds of it's not so much tourism for places like Maypop. It is more conventions. We survive off conventions, and we survive off specific kinds of conventions. Like for us, it's like, to be quite honest, like doctors' conventions, radiologists, cardiologists. When they come in, they seek out places like Maypop, dining experiences. The typical person who's coming to just visit New Orleans as a tourist is going to stick to the French Quarter. They're going to stick to the swamp tours. They're going to stick to, the Natchez on the Mississippi. They're going to eat gumbo. They're going to eat, they're going to try to find good red beans and rice. They're going to get po' boys. They're not going to come to Maypop. Maypop's a dining destination that survives off of people who basically literally like the 20% of diners.
It's the kind of place I like to go to.
And that's the thing is like, and that's why my view's always skewed because, those 20% is going to be all the time. Be like, dude, you can't shut Maypop. Like, it's such a gem. And you're like, okay, man, but 20% doesn't pay the bills.
Yeah.
And so now, but the thing that really kind of caught my business partner and I is when we opened Tana, so many people stopped us in the dining room. We're like, we love that restaurant. We just don't work downtown anymore. And also like crime really spiked in the city during pandemic. And so they're like, we don't go into the city anymore. Or if we do go into the city, we leave before the sun goes down. And that's like facts right now. Like people, you'll have some tourists and conventions come in and they'll stick to like right around the convention center, but the locals don't go downtown anymore. And so it's just, you're just like, oh man. And there's, you have a few restaurants that are still able to do it and they do it well. But they're much more middle of the road. They're much more approachable. Whereas Maypop's never going to be approachable. If I make it approachable, it's not going to be Maypop anymore. It has to kind of be what it is. And so now he and I are trying to find an investor to move it. That's really where our mind's at, if we can. But what we've done in the meantime, because, we still love the restaurant and we want that area to come back. We're hoping it comes back. So like right now we switched entirely to tasting menu.
And just dinner, or do you still do lunch?
No, there's no way we could do lunch. We've tried twice to do lunch, bring it back, and we just hemorrhaged money both times. Like bringing staff in, trying to do it right, and we just lost a ton of money. And so now, and that's the thing is like, because when you're starting a restaurant, you're going to lose money in the beginning because you have to show everyone how good it can be to build that steam. Like that's like a Tana right now. We run a higher labor cost than we should. Right? Because we're trying to show people, even though we're still growing that team and training people and getting them into position, we know that we're going to run a higher labor cost because we can't skimp on quality until we have that market secured. But when you've already had a market, lost a market, and then getting a market back again gets so much trickier because, you have to think about why did you lose it? Where did it go? Can you get it back? And so now, in the short term, we've switched to almost entirely tasting menu, which has changed our guest check average from like $45 a head to $80 a head.
That's nice.
It's nice, but we really need to be doing 40 people, not 20 people.
Yeah. Because you're serving more dishes and, you have to look at profit margins and all
right.
that. So just a higher check average doesn't always mean higher profit at the end of the day, right?
It doesn't. But we like right now we're running a tasting menu with like 3 cooks. And so that's the thing is if we magically get 40 covers and we do an $80 guest check average, then with 3 cooks, like suddenly all the numbers fall in line. But right now in the summer, you might get an 18 person night or a 15 person night. But then it's hard to staff properly because then all of a sudden you may have like a show at the Superdome because we're only a block from the Superdome or a show at one of the theaters right around us. And suddenly we'll have a night where 100 people show up and we'll only have 3 cooks. And then we're like, ah, shit. So it really makes it hard to nail quality when you're in sort of this in a huge unknown.
Well, I respect the honesty. Thank you. Because a lot of people this day and age, it seems like it's all flexing, right? Like everyone's on social media. Everything's great. Everything's going well. But I have a lot of people listening to this show who they either have a business or they want to start a business or they're doing it on the side right now. And I don't think it's beneficial for them to have everyone come on and say like, everything's fine, nothing to see here, it's, which is what I think a lot of that's out there right now.
Right. And I think I drive my business partner nuts because, typically the guys who go out there and are more positive and are just like, rainbows and sunshine, they have a tendency to have more people listen to them because people want to hear good things, not bad things. But on the flip side of that, we do have a lot of things going for us, like Tana is an insanely busy restaurant, which is awesome. And then, we've got a lot of plans for Mofo. And so, we do have a lot of things going our way. It's heartbreaking for Maypop because Maypop is such a good restaurant. And we have a team that's really sunk so much energy into it, and they're doing such a great job. Even now, I was just down with my chef de cuisine yesterday tasting dishes, and he was just nailing them. All the flavors were just exceptional. and I was like, God, man, this food is so good. Um, but they know, like, we're totally honest with them. We're like, dude, this is our game plan. Like, this is our 6-month game plan. We get through this summer. We're working on finding, a place to move it. We do have Super Bowl coming, there's a lot of stuff coming up in the fall. So I mean, there is a lot, that we're working towards. It's just finding the proper pathway.
What do you think best prepared you for running a restaurant or multiple restaurants? Was it your experience having worked at places like August, or, just like how did you learn, I guess, how to be able to be flexible and run a kitchen so well?
I don't know. Because I like to joke that I was trained in the fuck around era, and now I'm running businesses in the find out era.
Yeah.
I watched my old boss. I mean, a lot of my old bosses have multiple restaurants where they just run them like crazy people, and somehow those things just printed money. Whereas now we have to we just have to so micromanage everything. And so I don't know. I don't know the right answer for that. I think the biggest thing that I do is one, you kind of have to compartmentalize and give it up to your staff and trust that, the biggest things we've learned is you got to have P&L meetings. I think that's one of those ones where you, like, when you're running mom and pops and you're mom and pop style restaurant, you just kind of like, you're kind of watching the cost, you're kind of watching the labor cost, you're kind of watching the food cost. But you're so busy that it's kind of okay. And then, you look at you might kind of just spit some numbers out at your team. It's like, nah, man, the biggest thing is manager meetings. Like, you've got to have manager meetings, even if it's, like Maypop and Tonic alternate. And then like Mofo runs so smoothly now, they have their kind of own internal ones. And then we sit down with them once a month. And then Maypop and Mofo like every other week. So every week, my business partner and I are going to at least one manager meeting. It's either Tonic or it's Maypop. And we sit down, we look at numbers, we go over what we want to accomplish. And then just really tuning everyone in to, now all of our restaurants run on Toast. So everyone's got a Toast app on their phone, all of my managers, and they pull it up and they're looking at sales versus labor. And then, all the restaurants run with extra chefs. So my back of house is constantly looking at money in versus money out, because as long as you're scanning every day, it's showing you what you spent. And so it's just a lot of putting an expectation level on your teams. And that's what's really made things easier. Like when my business partner and I finally started sitting down with our front and back house and being like, all right, you are responsible for these numbers. Cause he and I would walk around and agonize being like, oh my God, the numbers. And then, I think it was like a year ago, we just weren't bouncing back from pandemic like we thought we were. And we can't take all this stress on ourselves. And you forget because you're still thinking of yourself as like that individual line cook or that individual chef de cuisine, when you're actually like holding up the weight of all of the restaurant's costs or high costs and lack of revenue. And it's like, okay, we have to as chef de cuisines, we have to remember that they're still doing what I think a chef de cuisine does, which is coming in, they're still kind of working a pretty set schedule. They're managing labor, they're making sure the schedule's written, they're making sure the orders are done, but are they really like shouldering that weight of like, no, man, are you putting in the right orders? Are you writing the schedule properly to where it's not, we don't have too much labor sitting around? Like, we need to put that stuff on our teams. And about a year ago is when we really started doing that, making sure everyone was looking at the numbers. We always did shift logs, but now the shift logs have, like, every night when the shift report is put in, it has the daily hourly labor cost. It has, how much was in, what percentage was alcohol sales, what percentage was to-go sales, what percentage was in-house sales. Like, so we're tracking all those things now. And like, what are we doing to get more people in the door? What are we doing to get more alcohol sales up? Like, we want you guys looking at these numbers because, we always kind of did it with heart before, but now we have to do it with our head a little more and actually look at, words like metrics and data mining, things I've never used in my life because all I ever wanted to do is just make delicious food and delicious cocktails. And now it's like, you have to do these things if you want to be successful.
Definitely. And I think that's something the big companies do much better. And that's something I had to learn. I worked for IKEA for a number of years. They also use rational combi ovens, which is a whole side thing. And that was my favorite. But everyone had to take ownership of sales for the day. They had at the time clock what the expected sales for the day, and whether you were a 16-year-old dishwasher or someone, I worked in the restaurant, they have a restaurant there, and the store GM could come up to a dishwasher and say, hey, Nick, what's the anticipated sales today? Like, they were expected to know that today was a green day, and that means we're going to do, 250,000 in revenue or 10,000 in the restaurant or whatever. Like, everyone took ownership of that, because it wasn't enough to just come in and say, like, I'm just here to cook meatballs today. It was like, you needed to be part of that process. And I've worked at places with daily spend down sheets. Like, you take a monthly food budget and say, okay, for the month we have $100,000, which means every week we have $25,000, which means every day you have this. And then you put in at the end of the day all of your invoices. And it's like, well, now by Tuesday you only have, 8,000 left. By Wednesday, you have 4, and you get down to Friday. It's like, okay, today's menu, we got to be using the stuff in you were not allowed to buy anything else because you had to stay on budget. Because I worked in also contract food service. So you were on like a P&L. So basically, you work for Sodexo and you go into a university or a business, you've told them, I can do it for this much money. And if you spend more than that, they don't pay you. That's how a P&L in corporate contract food service works. So like, from the get-go, it was like, okay, we told them that, they're going to pay us $100,000 a month for us to do it. It cannot cost us $125,000 a month. So like, this is how much you guys have to spend. And I had to teach chefs de cuisine and sous chefs, when you're putting in orders, this is how much you have for the day to keep us on target. And actually, you want to be under, because you don't make any profit if you don't go under. So seeing stuff like that really helped me when I started my own business, because I don't think you get that in a traditional restaurant setting.
No, I think that's awesome to hear. And I think that's the other part of it is like now, especially in the last year, Jeff, who's my business partner, and I, like, we just started like asking for help, which we never did before. Like now, like our new big thing is ask for help. Like, be honest, talk to people, and because before I think he and I were just very proud. Like, our first restaurant, we won all these awards. Like, we know what we're doing, but we really didn't. We knew how to make great food, great service, great drinks, but we didn't know the business side of it at all, because I really wasn't taught the business side of it when I ran restaurants. Like, my job was just to make sure that we were staffed and the food went out awesome. That was my job when I ran August for 7 years. And so to really get down to the nitty gritty of it, and, our new thing now is we keep trying to get meetings with people who are smarter than us, like keep making sure we're the least intelligent person in the room and just ask a lot of questions. So it's been a lot of that, of us just sitting there and just calling for lunch meetings. We'll buy people lunch, people who have expanded big chains, people who have overseen, large restaurant groups, and just sitting with them and being like, okay, what are your best practices? And just taking notes.
So if you were to open a restaurant today, I mean, you just opened one, but if you were to do it again, like now, knowing everything you've known, what advice would you give to someone who, has maybe never opened a restaurant, but has worked in a restaurant? Let's say maybe is even an executive chef or a chef de cuisine, someone who has some of that experience. What would you say, you really need to have control over? I mean, we talked about pricing and that kind of stuff, but anything else?
So like the old thing I used to say was, make sure the cooking is the thing that the most, because it's the thing you get to do the least when you open your restaurant the first time. Even when I opened Mofo, I had 2 really awesome sous chefs who now are award-winning chefs in their own right, Trey Smith and Blake Aguilar, who have Saint Germain. They're Food and Wine Destiny chefs. Like, they were my opening sous chefs for Mofo. They had worked for me in August, and when I opened Mofo, they both came and worked for me. And like having those 2 guys, because they said to me, they're like, we know that you have to do all this other stuff. Let us cook. Just sit with us and do the recipes and do the first tastings, and then let us take it from there. And they were really awesome about that. And so that really allowed me the room to make a lot of other mistakes, because they were at least just hammering the food out. So, I mean, and I have a business partner, and I used to have 2 business partners. And, a lot of people would always say, like, when are you going to go do something on your own? Like, what do you mean on my own? Like, make sure you have a good business partner. Make sure you have someone else, because I've seen friends of mine do it on their own, and they were trying to do the food and manage their GM and manage all the bills and payroll, and like trying to do it all while coming up with food for a menu. And that's insanely difficult.
I think the hard thing is, how do you find that person? Because again, like I have my own personal chef business. I don't have anyone working with me. I do all the everything from the marketing to the budget to everything. And I've looked for someone to bring in. And this is something I hear from all my friends. They've got food trucks, they're doing all these things, and they're doing it all themselves because I think, some of it's being a control freak, but some is just finding the right fit, especially if now you're working by yourself. How do you find that person and a co-founder or whatever you want to call it, partner?
That's a really hard one. And I mean, dude, like major props to you, because I've watched my friends do it and I'm like, dude, how are you doing it? How are you doing all of that? Because, like the one thing I like about my business partner is I found someone and he can be gruff and this and that, but like he doesn't have a bad bone in his body. Because even when I'm sometimes like detached and I'm busy and like something happens, he'll stop me. It's like, no, this is the right thing to do. Like, like if for like one of our employees, something happens, he's like, no, we need to do something for this person. Like they've been with us for a long time. We need to take care of them. Like, and like, cause he seems like this very gruff and grumble kind of guy. And everyone kind of jokes because he is very direct. He can make situations very uncomfortable if there's something that needs to be addressed, whereas I'm sort of more of the listener and sort of the good cop. But like when it comes to serious situations where someone needs help or attention, he's like, no, we need to do the right thing here, which I think is awesome. So like and I think that's the number one thing about him. Like he and I have both made a lot of mistakes. We both fucked some things up over the years, but I think he always had the businesses and all of our employees' interests in mind with every decision he's made. And I think it's finding someone like that to where even if they make a mistake, they're trying to do it for all the right reasons. Because I have so many friends who have gotten in bed with people who then they find out that person was just taking money like left and right, or that person was just like never was around, never getting anything done. So I've seen a lot of friends hit that situation too. So you bring up a really good point, and I don't know what the right answer for that is.
It's more like, I've always, when I looked at staff, it's almost like hiring for attitude and aptitude and not like skill. Right. I mean, you don't discount skill, but like if I have people come in, that's why I would always put a lot on interviewing, right? Like really getting to know someone, like how are they going to fit with the team? I don't care if you came with a 4-year culinary degree. If it seems like you're going to create drama in the kitchen and, we're all going to crumble under that, it's not worth having you. And I'd rather have someone with no cooking experience who seems like they are a good person and have a good work ethic. And I guess like trying to figure out who that is.
You're right. And I guess that's the same thing if you're going to choose a business partner. It's like, and that's what I kind of like about my business partner. We're not, and I tell this to everyone, he and I are not the best of friends. Like we've now been in like a 10-year marriage. So like we definitely respect each other. We wouldn't want to do it with anyone else. But like we don't hang out. Like our families don't hang out. We don't do things because I know people who are like, oh, me and my business partner, like we go to Vegas together and we go do this and we go do that. And like, you and I are like, no, man, we got our own lives. We'll sit and do all the really uncomfortable things together. But at the same time, we have no problem calling each other out because we're not best friends. We're not super close. We don't drink on the weekends together.
Yeah. Yeah, it does blur the lines. Well, I have probably more questions than we have time to get into. So I want to give you a little time. Is there anything you want to talk about before we get out of here today, or any last words?
So I guess the big thing now is that I'm trying to sort of switch. I've always been very much I don't know. I think all of us who have run kitchens sort of have that mindset of we're always looking for the problems. We're always, or at least for me, I'm always trying to fix everything. And I think now I am trying to switch because I think there is a certain truth to all those people who are overly positive all the time. If you are pushing out that positivity, if you are pushing out the goals to get ahead, I think you do sort of find those pathways easier. So I am trying to sort of switch my mindset on that and being like, no, man, we got a lot of good shit going for us. We've come a long way. Our restaurant, we have a restaurant group that has 3 restaurants, 2 of which have been open for more than 5 years, one of which has been open for 10 years. Both of those restaurants, even though they've hit hard times with the pandemic, have won so many awards. And it's like you forget all that because you're just trying to get through the day. And I think now is I'm trying to switch that, for my family, for my kids, because, my kids see me stressed a lot. And I'm just like, okay, man, I have to start turning that off and being, I even remember one time, God, I was sitting at breakfast with my sons, and I think my son was like slurping his drink or blowing bubbles in his drink. And I'm like, hey, man, can you stop that? That's not what we do at the dinner table. And my other son goes, it's okay, Liam. He's just upset because it's summertime and the restaurants are really struggling. And I'm like, dude, And he was like, they were like 8 years old at this point. And I'm like, oh man, like I gotta be better about this. I cannot bring all this stuff home to my kids.
Yeah.
And so now I am really trying to have a little more attitude of gratitude. And because, my team's used to me walking around being like, what's the problem today? Like, what's wrong? Whereas I think maybe it's better for me. And it's funny because I say these words because I used to tell Paul, my chef, because, like, hey man, we got to be sunshine factories for our teams. Like, we got to be the ones pumping them up with getting them excited. And I think I was that way for a long time. But since pandemic, I have been very like just austere and stern and not the greatest person. I think I kind of got to get back to really pumping my teams up and getting them excited to do work and getting them excited to do great food because, I have 3 restaurants that all make really great food and give really good service and have really great cocktail programs. And I think we need to really lean back into that.
Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. Yeah. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I can't wait to get back down to New Orleans and check out the new restaurant.
Yeah, let me know.
And maybe hit all 3 of them while I'm down there. It's someplace that I've always loved and I anticipate heading back to soon.
That'd be awesome.
Well, thanks again. And to all of our listeners, this has been Chris with Chefs Without Restaurants. Thanks so much and have a great week.
Thank you.
You're still here? The podcast's over. If you are indeed still here, thanks for taking the time to listen to the show. I'd love to direct you to one place, and that's chefswithoutrestaurants.org. From there, you'll be able to join our email newsletter, get connected in our free Facebook group, and join our personal chef, catering, and food truck database so I can help get you more job leads. And you'll also find a link to our sponsor page, where you'll find products and services I love. You pay nothing additional to use these links, but I may get a small commission, which helps keep the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast and organization running. You might even get a discount for using some of these links. As always, you can reach out to me on Instagram at Chefs Without Restaurants or send me an email at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.